Well, let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever felt completely stuck in life? That regardless what you did, that at the end of the day, you just returned to the same place and just felt just completely stuck. Like regardless if you tried harder, maybe you read books or you're part of a group as Shane was talking about, or even praying. And all those may have temporarily given a little bit of relief, but at the end of the day, you would just say, no, I just came back to the same place, and here we are again, here I am again, totally stuck. You ever felt that? That's exactly where I was at in 2013. At that time, my mom had just passed away from cancer in 2012. My dad had relationally walked away, and life was just very complex. And I remember with my marriage at the time with Jill and I, we were just totally stuck. And at that time, again, lots of things were happening. We had 5 boys, 12 and under. We just started North Point with an incredible group of people, and just the demands, if you ever started anything new, either nonprofit or for-profit, really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's an enormous amount of activity. And I remember I was just looking at Jill, and she's looking at me, and we're just like, the trajectory of our marriage was just not in a great place. And I would look at her, and I'd say things like this. I would be like, babe, if I go forward, if I go back, if I go left, if I go right, I don't know what's going on, because it really doesn't matter. We just end up in the exact same place. And Jill felt the same way, and we were just stuck in our marriage. And not only that, but I was just stuck personally. Guys, I was exhausted. I was about 38 years old at the time, and I'd lived by a couple philosophies. One, that I'll out-hustle it, and I will outsmart it. Whatever it is in life, it doesn't matter. I'm going to fix it. I'll figure it out. That was one philosophy. The other philosophy I live by is that my value, my worth, my significance is based upon the external. Whatever I can accomplish in school, whatever I can accomplish in golf, whatever I could accomplish at Dell, whatever I could at church, North Point as we're starting. It was all tied to what's happening. Performance, success, accomplishments. And the more I accomplished, the better I'd feel. The less I would accomplish, the worse I would feel. And I'm telling you, that dynamic works for a little while. But at that point, I was so tired in the depth of my soul. And I remember just trying to be present with my 5 sons. I was there, but I was not present. And I could start to see the ripple effect of that in their lives. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. I was so stuck. And then through some relationships and networking, I was introduced to this woman by the name of Denise. She's a counselor on the East Coast. And so we started meeting over the phone, and I started telling Denise about my life and about my family of origin and about my marriage and about North Point and about, just my boys and all kinds of different things. And again, my life was complex. I was going through grief because my mom had just passed away. My dad had relationally walked away at the time. Today, we're in a much better place. But back then, I didn't know what to do with my dad. I was so angry at him. And there were so many dynamics. And so I'm just sharing all these things with Denise and talking about the narrative of my marriage, talking about my narrative when it comes to, life. And here's what I think, and about God and about church and the whole thing. And in the midst of that discussion, Denise asked me a question that I'd never heard before. And it just so caught me off guard. She said, Buck, whose voice is that? Whose voice is that? It's like, what? It's my voice. I am talking to you. This is my truth. Here's what I'm sharing with you. This is where I'm at. What are you talking about, Denise? I said, please explain. And she said, Buck, over the last 30 years, after reading the scriptures over and over and over and over, there are these dominant voices throughout the scriptures that you and I will either listen to or push away. That there's narratives that you can embrace that will really change the trajectory and the quality of your life. And Denise, in summary, over the course of several months, which turned into several years, the point she was making to me, she was saying this, is that the narratives you tell yourself today become the life you live tomorrow. Buck, the narratives you're telling yourself today about Jill and marriage and hope and what you can do and who, blame and all that kind of stuff. The narratives you tell yourself today about God, the narratives you tell yourself about your past and what's happened and what happened to you and your mom and your dad, the narratives you tell yourself about others, and the narrative you tell yourself about you when you look in the mirror, but you just need to know. All throughout scriptures, there are these very dominant narratives, and your temptation every day will be able to listen to narratives that keep you stuck or begin replacing those narratives that lead to freedom in your life. And over the course of about 3 to 4 years, I began to step in to freedom and taste it and experience it in all aspects of my life. And today, that's what I want to talk about. And the reason why I want to talk about narratives today is because we're in part 3 of this series that we've been in called Ready or Not. This is a series all about change. And over the last couple of weeks, Jordan has done a fantastic job just talking about things that lead to change, genuine change, authentic change in our lives. In week 1, Jordan talked about the fact that if you and I are going to experience authentic change in our life, it's not simply about willpower. Willpower is part of it, but there's got to be where does God fit in that? And he contextualized that in an incredible way. He did a great job in part 1. In part 2, he said, you and I change as a result of our community. That your closest relationships will determine the direction and quality of your life. And he gave some great context on that as well. And if you weren't here in part 1 and part 2, I really want to encourage you to go back and listen to what Jordan talked about. Now today, again, as I said earlier, today I want to talk about this truth right here, this principle. That the narratives you tell yourself today become the life you live tomorrow. And the reason why I want to focus in on narratives is because throughout this series, we've been talking about what James Bryan Smith, who wrote the book Good and Beautiful God, what he talks about leads to change. And what he said is that based upon his experience and connection with all these great theologians and great Christian thinkers over the last 100 years, he's just had the privilege to be on the other side of them. He said, observationally, there are 4 things that lead to change in your life and my life. And these are the 4 things. He said, God, what Jordan talked about in part 1, community, talked about in part 2, narratives, I'm going to talk about this week, and daily practices, Jen's going to talk about next week. So today, let's focus in on narratives and the power of a narrative. And guys, here's what's really cool. It's not just James Bryan Smith, in my opinion, when it comes to narratives. What's fascinating is what we've discovered the last decade when it comes to neuroscience. We know so much more about the brain and the power of narratives today than we did a decade ago. In fact, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who's a cognitive neuroscientist who specializes in the brain and thoughts and the power of thoughts and mental health, here's what she says. Check this out. She says, our thoughts are real, physical things that occupy mental real estate. What we think about repeatedly changes the structure of our brain. She goes on to talk about that your brain is a muscle, my brain is a muscle. There's a thing called neuroplasticity, that the more you ruminate, the more you think about a thought, the more you begin to, this narrative is controlling your mind, it actually changes the structure of your brain. And the structure of your brain changes, it changes your habits change your life. They're all directly connected. And your thoughts are physical things that will change your life. Fascinating stuff. And then Dr. Daniel Amen, he's a psychiatrist as well as he looks at brain scans. In fact, arguably, he's looked at more brains, over 200,000 brains, than anyone else on our planet. In fact, he's looked at the brain of Miley Cyrus and Kim Kardashian, which is kind of cool, right? I mean, imagine that. You're like, that's Miley's brain. You know, that's Kim Kardashian's brain. Whatever you think about that, let's get back on track. So here's what Dr. Amen says. Look at this. It's fascinating about our narratives, our thoughts. He says, every thought you have is either making your brain better or worse. Guys, lean into this. There's no neutral thoughts. There's no, well, that's just what I think. That's just my truth. Or there's no, I'm just going to follow my heart. That's just my desire. You can do that for sure. But you need to also know it's not neutral. It will either keep you stuck in old patterns and then, blame shifting and it's always him, it's always her, it's always them, it's always that. Or those thought patterns have the ability to set you free and experience genuine change in your life. And guys, we have seen this observationally. I mean, there's so many examples of this, but one example I'll just show you. How many of you guys have seen this movie right here, Remember the Titans? Anyone? Yes, this is one of my all-time favorite movies. I love it. It's early 70s. It's about segregation and integration in high school football, 2 high school football coaches. I mean, just all kinds of tensions and amazing stories all throughout this movie. So I just want to focus on 2 characters because it really illustrates what we're talking about. There's an individual in the movie named Louis, and Louis is a lineman. Big old guy. He's just a love ball. He just loves everybody. It's just great. Louis got a great story. And then there's another individual called the Rev. And the Rev was so well articulate, brilliant. And then there's a scene in the movie where you have Louis and the Rev, they're rooming together at their football camp, and they're in the same dorm room, and they're talking about the future. And Louis talking about what his narrative is. And as you hear Louis' narrative, imagine how many times he rehearsed this. Imagine how many times he had thought and ruminated on these thoughts over and over and over. And here's what Louis says to the Rev. He says, I ain't gonna get no C+ grades. I'm just a down home, no good, never going to no college, white trash, man. That's who I am. Now, if we could just pause in that moment. Just go, Louis, who told you that? Whose voice is that? How many years have you told yourself that? Over and over, he was utterly stuck. And we could see the trajectory of his life. And then the Rev says something so simple but so powerful. The Rev says this to Louis, I'll tutor you. I will tutor you. In other words, Louis, there's another narrative here. Louis, I see something, a narrative you do not see. That you have what it takes, Louis. That your intelligence is good enough to get C's and maybe even beyond that. And Louis, that your life has so much value and worth. You're not white trash. I don't see that. What I see is I'm going to take my time, the most precious thing I have. I'm going to give it to you to tutor you because I see such value in you. And that's the true narrative. And the whole movie goes on to play this out. And Louis begins to replace his false narratives with this true narrative that the Rev gave him. And at the end of the movie, he comes running to Coach Boone and the Rev and says, look, I got C's and C's get degrees, right? And he went to college. It's amazing. The trajectory of his life changed. He got unstuck. And this principle that the narratives you tell yourself today will become your life and what it looks like tomorrow. Man, we see this all around us. If you're a parent, come on, you see it in your son. You see it in your daughter. You see it in your kids, that rumination, what they're thinking about over and over, and just how it's shaping their life. In your wife, your husband. The conversation sometimes can go south about, those are some crazy thoughts, sweetie. You know how that works. But you see it, right? You can see what it's doing to your relationship. You can see it on the other side of you at school. With your coach, whatever kind of is going on there, with your teammates, with people in your class, you can see it at work, with your boss, with your colleagues. You can see it in your family. You can see it in your mom. You can see it in your dad. But my question for you, and I really want you to be honest about this. How about this? Can you see it in you? Wherever you're at in life, if there's a place you're stuck, can you see it in you? What's the narrative? Maybe that was just passed down to you. You didn't do it. It was just passed down, given to you. You just haven't been aware. You haven't been intentional, but this is what you believe. This is what you would say is your truth. What's your narrative as a result of an emotion or a desire or just simply this thing we say in our culture, follow your heart. So therefore, here's my truth. Have you thought about your narrative? Because there are no neutral thoughts. They're going to keep you stuck, or they're going to allow you to step in to the freedom that Jesus Christ invited us into when he said, guys, I have come to give you life and life to the full, and my truth will set you free. So what do we do with that? What does that mean for your life and mine? Well, here's what I love is that God is not silent on this whole subject. He leans in heavily. If you were to read the Bible cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation, you would see over and over and over, like God leans into this whole narrative conversation, what's happening with our thought life. Set your hearts and minds on things above, whatever's noble, whatever's good. Think about such things. This is constant theme of what to do with our thoughts, because no thought is neutral. It'll work for you or against you. It'll keep you stuck or lead you to freedom. And so today, here's what I want to do. I want to focus in on just a couple verses. And it's my opinion, but I think these verses are the ones that are most poignant, the ones that are most focused on what you and I can do with our narrative and how to begin to potentially change our narrative today and what we tell ourselves today so that tomorrow can look much more free than it looks like today. So what I want to do is I want to look at the letter of Romans. Paul is the author of the letter of Romans. And if you don't know who Paul is, real short, we don't have time to unpack his story, but real short, Paul was a man who hated Jesus, who hated Jesus' followers. He couldn't stand him. He had a lot of wealth and a lot of power. He leveraged his wealth and power to go stomp out this movement. He couldn't stand him. He thought it was a cult, thought it was heretical. In fact, he took his power to the extent to actually have these followers of Jesus killed. That's who Paul was. Then one day he came face to face with a resurrected Jesus and went, oops, I was wrong. And then he spent the rest of his life telling people all about the good news of Jesus Christ, that you can be forgiven. You can have a brand new identity. You can have peace with God. Your eternity can be secure. It has nothing to do with how much you do and how good or bad you are. Come on, that's a bankrupt system. Something brand new is coming to the world, a brand new covenant. It's Jesus and what he did for you. He spent the rest of his life sharing this incredible news. That's Paul. And Paul's writing this letter to these followers of Jesus in Rome. Hard place to be a follower of Jesus. But these were new followers of Jesus, and they had all these questions. And one of their questions was about, what to do with all these narratives. And man, it seems like these things are connected. What's going on here is connected to the direction of my life. And so Paul leans in, and here's what he says. I'm going to read this in its entirety, and then I'm going to unpack this because this is such incredible language he uses. So here's what Paul says right here. He says, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and improve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, here's what's really important to understand. This is originally written in the Greek. In the Greek, this is about as aggressive of words and language and sentence structures as you could make appealing to people. Appealing to people in the first century, appealing to you and to me. So here's what Paul's getting at. He sets up this kind of dichotomy, this tension. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Like he's like urgent, don't do this. In other words, there is a narrative in our culture, in our world. And every generation probably has a slightly different narrative or a radically different narrative. And you guys know this. I mean, all you have to do is study history for about 30 seconds. You're like, yep, that's true. That every generation will define truth differently. Every generation will define relationships differently. Every generation will define words differently. And then you have all these truths in our culture as a result. Systemic kind of cascading, waterfalling out into our whole culture. Then you have all these truths on morality, truths on sex, truths on money, truths on God, truths on the church, all these kind of narratives. And the culture's pumping them out every day, every day, every day, every day. Here's all this truth. And then Paul says there's a whole nother truth over here. There's a whole nother set of narratives. And God in the beginning, when he created you, created me, created the world, he said, good. That's good. Man, it's in my design, you're going to experience maximum freedom. It's in my definitions, you're going to experience maximum freedom in life. And if you're willing to surrender to me, Jesus says in Luke 9, you're going to find life in life as I designed it. Good. And these two things are at odds. And Paul says, do not conform. Do not embrace the truth of the day. It's a chasing after the wind, and it will change 40 years from now. I guarantee it. And he says, instead, there's something you can do to be transformed. And this word he uses is so strong here. The word transformed, again, written in the Greek, at the root word for transform is the word metamorphosis. That's where we get metamorphosis. That's caterpillar to butterfly. So Paul says, hey, as you're doing this, as you're kind of juxtaposing and looking at both of these truths, as you're not conforming here, you can do something. You can take action in such a way that it will transform you. You go from a caterpillar stuck to a butterfly. All kinds of freedom. It is radical change with your life, with your relationships, with your identity, with your truths. There is something at play here, Paul says, that is so big. And if you don't take action, then the world will take action right here, and it will shape you. You have to be forward-leaning. This is not passive. This is why this language is so aggressive, what Paul is using. But he loves you, and he's for you, and he's for me. And so he says, there's this, do not conform to the pattern of the world, be transformed. How do we move from a caterpillar to a butterfly? Experience this freedom, Paul, by the renewing of your mind. What's that mean? Again, aggressive language here. Renewing literally means remodel. And it's not like a light remodel. It's not like, hey, I'm going to go to my house and replace some couch cushions and paint 2 walls. No, this is like a complete radical remodel. It's going into your house. This is taking all of your furniture, all your couch cushions, all of your, appliances, all of your floors. This is stripping all of your walls down to the studs, taking your plumbing, taking all your electrical, taking it all to the dump. And it's gone. And then coming back in, building brand new walls, brand new electrical, brand new plumbing, brand new floors, brand new appliances, and brand new furniture. You step back and you're like, whew. That is renewed. So Paul is essentially saying to you and to me, hey, I don't know where your narratives came from. There's not judgment or shame upon your narratives. Maybe they were just passed down to you. Maybe you just absorbed those. I'm not here to shame you. But what I'm here is to show you a way to experience freedom, to get unstuck. It's by renewing. It's by intentionally saying, are there any narratives here that are false narratives that I've adopted based upon emotion, based upon desire, based upon just the momentum of the culture? Because that's going to change every 40 years. And whatever they are, would you be willing to replace those narratives with something brand new, renovate, remodel these up here, completely get rid, and embrace something brand new? Jesus talks about this dynamic again in Luke chapter 9. He says this dynamic is going to feel like taking up your cross daily. It's going to be a struggle. It's going to be very difficult. In fact, on some things, it's going to feel like I'm dying. This is who I'm dying here. But Jesus gives you a prerogative. He says, you don't have to. You can hold on to your life, your narratives, but you're going to remain stuck. Or you can surrender them, paradoxically, because it doesn't make any sense at the time oftentimes. And you find life to the full, and freedom. And he leaves that to you and I. And again, so many examples. Remember the Titans. I mean, let's go back to Louis. How long did Louis hold on? I am white trash, no good, never going to college. I am my dad. I am my generation. I am my great-great-grandfather. That's who I am. He replaced, remodeled, renewed. No, I'm worth it. I have what it takes. I'm worth the time of the Rev, and it changed the direction of his life. That's what Paul's saying in Romans 12. And then he goes on in 2 Corinthians, says the same thing, but gives us some really practical handles. I love what he says in 2 Corinthians. A similar audience, very difficult in the city of Corinth to be a follower of Jesus. Lots of different struggle, lots of different pressure from the culture of the day. And these followers of Jesus are asking Paul, okay, what do I do with this stuff here? And Paul says, let me lean in. I'll give you some great handles. Look at what he says. I love this. He says, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. In essence, Paul's saying, here's the deal. Capture the narratives in your mind. Slow down. And then replace them. In other words, practically speaking, catch yourself. Catch it. Whenever you feel stuck in your marriage, feel stuck in a dating relationship, feel stuck in life, what's my future? What am I going to do? What school am I going to go to? What about my dating relationships? Feel stuck with your parents? Feel stuck in the past because of something that happened to you? Feel stuck in your anxiety? Whatever it is. Catch it. There's a narrative associated with that stuckness. Catch it. Slow down. Just pause. What is 5 minutes literally going to cost you if you can slow down? And then name it. Name it. To say, whose voice is that? What's the narrative associated with this? Have you ever done that? Have you ever paused long enough just to name it? And then replace it. Surrender it. It's going to be tough. I get it. It's not sometimes emotionally satisfying, but it's so freeing. Replace it with the very truth of Jesus Christ and his promise. It will set you free. Paul says, even with God, to know his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Guys, I have seen this pattern work so many times in so many people's lives. The other day, I was meeting with a young man. We were talking about forgiveness. We were talking about sin and being, that God has made a promise. What Jesus has done on the cross is enough, satisfied it. Your sin has separated the east from the west. You are not what you've done. That is totally a false narrative. That's a lie. You are not your past. You are not what you did last night, what you did 10 years ago. That's not who you are. That's not your identity. So we were talking about all that. And he made this statement. He said, Buck, I get all that, and I believe all that. But I believe it's true for everyone else, just not for me. That God's forgiveness and grace is big enough for all the people, but not for me. Not for me. And I said, can we just pause 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Can we catch this moment? And can I ask you a question? Whose voice is that? Who told you that? Where did you learn that? And then we began to unpack Matthew chapter 7. The woman who took the expensive perfume in her hair and washed the feet of Jesus because she was so full of shame in the past. And Jesus looks at her, and you should read Matthew chapter 7. It says, your sins are forgiven. You're forgiven. And I said, would you be willing to take that, put that on your phone, put that on your computer, put that in your car, put that wherever you go for the next 30 days, and just begin to replace and invite God in. God, help me replace this false narrative. I feel everything in me like this is true, but I know your truth will set me free. 30 days later, on the other side of this young man, you could see the wind in his sails. You could see that he had tailwinds, that there was a sense of freedom he began to experience. That's Paul's point. And that's the narrative. That's the principle we're talking about today. That the narrative you tell yourself, whatever you're telling yourself, will become the life you live tomorrow. So, let me just ask a quick question. Why is this so difficult? This is not like rocket science, right? I don't think probably some of you are like, okay, Buck, speed up. Come on, I got it, right? Why don't we do this? Why do we stay stuck? What is going on? Because literally, we know this is good for us. Like if God was willing to give his one and only son for us, the truth he gives us, the clarity he gives us, that is to set us free. It's wonderful. Why is it so hard? Why is there like this force that's battling against this daily, intentionally decision to replace these narratives? Well, what's so cool is Paul actually addresses this. So I want to end with this. Here's what Paul says. There's a dynamic going on beyond the psychological, beyond even an aspect of a spiritual dynamic here. He adds another element to the spiritual, and he says this in 2 Corinthians. Look at this. He says, so that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. Now, I don't know where you land with Satan and demons, but here's where I land. I think Jesus is 100% real. I think you're 100% real. And I think I'm 100% real. And I think Satan is 100% real and demons are. And the reason why is because of one word, Jesus. Jesus, read John chapter 8. Jesus is very clear. Satan is real. And let me tell you what he is and what he does. He masquerades. He's an accuser. He is a liar. He's a murderer. His native tongue is lies. In other words, if you know somebody from a different country maybe and they would say, hey, here's my native language. Jesus says, you want to know Satan's native language? It's lies. He's brilliant. He's had thousands of years of history and observation of human nature to weave these lies in that sound so good. And his point is this, don't be unaware. This idea here, don't be unaware. That you don't stay stuck because you're weak. Oftentimes we're like, I'm just so weak, and that person, I just wish I had their. No. Not about willpower here. You stay stuck because you're unaware. That there is a real force. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, your battle's not against one another. What are you doing? That we're relationally, there's another force out there that don't be unaware of, that is working right here. The primary domain of Satan is right here with you and I. And he says, don't be outwitted. In other words, this idea here is when it comes to being outwitted, Satan doesn't outwit us by overpowering us. We give him way too much credit. He outwits us by convincing us a false narrative is our own voice. Remember what Scripture calls Satan, an angel of light. He masquerades and he identifies and can smell your emotion, lust, fear, anger. And he captures it. And he weaves in all these brilliant sounding lies that you would say, my heart demands. And before long, you're stuck. Not overnight, over time. And you're like, what in the world is going on? Don't be unaware or outwitted by Satan himself. So what do we do? What do we do with all of that? That's a lot to process. So back to 2013. So Denise and I were talking, having these conversations, unpacking a lot of these false narratives that are keeping me stuck. She says this statement that I think was so helpful. She said, Buck, here's the deal. When it comes to false narratives, most false narratives that keep us stuck fall into three places: what I believe about God, what I believe about myself, and what I believe about others. So what I want to do as we wrap up, I just want to unpack a couple of these false narratives. And I want to share these with you. And I really want you to think about what you walked in here today, or what you're watching or listening, kind of how you entered this space today. Are you carrying any false narratives about God, about you, about others? And this exercise is not to shame you, I promise. It's not to bring judgment. This is just to capture maybe that what was handed to you, what you've absorbed. And even though it was handed and you absorbed it, maybe it's not your fault at all. You do have agency, which means you have the power to do something. You and I can do something today, in this moment, that begin to allow us to take a step towards freedom. So first we have to catch it, right? Let's catch it together. Are there any false narratives when it comes to God? I'm going to read a few of these, and I'm curious if you can relate with any of these. So when it comes to God, is there a false narrative such as this, that God is disappointed in me? Does that play out in your brain, in your thought life, in your narratives? God is just so disappointed in me. How about this? That God is distant or silent? Man, I feel like he's so close to so-and-so, but for me, God is so silent. How about this? God loves me, but only when I perform. If I check that church box, if I stop cussing, if I stop looking at that, if I give money, God's happy. But if I don't perform, it's no good. You see, what's interesting is Satan doesn't need you to stop believing in God. He just needs you to start believing a different narrative about God, and then he's got you. How about yourself? You. Any of these false narratives connect? That I am unworthy of love, so you hide and you numb and you control everything around you? Because the more you can get control, the more peace you have in here. How about this false narrative? I am my worst mistake. I am what I have done. That is the lie. And as long as you are what you have done, you will not change. Because to change, you must become someone else. And if you are what you've done, you're stuck. And Satan's lie is not to repeat the sin you did of the past. Satan's lie is just to say, that's who you are. That's who you are. And here you have Jesus over here with another narrative saying, I've invited you into a brand new identity to be a son or daughter of God. Does that narrative play out for you? How about this one? I have to earn my value. Are you exhausted? Are you full of anxiety because it's continually external that you find your value in what you do? How about others? Any false narratives when it comes to others? Can you relate with any of these? That they will never change? See, that lie freezes the relationship and kills any hope for the future. He's just never going to change. She's never going to change. That's what they always do. Okay. Well, in that relationship, you've killed it. There's no hope for that relationship. How about this? They are against me. In other words, that turns people into enemies. And then you listen to defend versus listen to discover. Is there a way forward? Or, last one, that they are the problem. They're the problem, not me. And if they're the problem, then you have no agency. You're stuck. You have no prerogative to be able to say, yeah, maybe they did 99% of the issue, but there's my piece of the pie. I'm going to own that, and maybe that'll provide a little bit of hope here. You see how these subtle narratives can get you? Now, here's the deal, guys. All 9 of those narratives were not to judge you. That was me in 2013. Those were the narratives. It took 3 years for Denise and I to unpack each one of those, the origin of it and the impact and outcome of it in my life. Those were the 9 narratives that were keeping me stuck in my marriage, in my parenting, being a pastor, being a follower of Jesus, in my relationship with God, going, God, I want to experience you, but you seem so far away. I mean, that's it. And over those 3 years, we begin to catch it. We begin to name it. Here it is. Here's where it comes from. And replace it with the very truths of Christ that set us free. And here's the truths of Christ, just to remind us of true narratives. When it comes to God, that God delights in me. I have a home with God. My soul is at rest with God. That when it comes to God, God is present and attentive. There is safety. He is my rock. When it comes to God, God's love is secure, not performance-based. I am accepted not because of what I've done. I'm accepted because of what Jesus has done. And it's through my acceptance. Therefore, I obey. Yourself, Couple truths I discovered. I am fully known and deeply loved. I have intrinsic worth and value. When it came to myself, I am more than what I've done. I was so held captive by my past and then passed it on to my boys. To myself, God is still forming me. There is still hope. It is not too late. I told myself that over and over. God will redeem those years. That's the kind of God He is. When it comes to others, God is still at work in them. There's still place for hope. I have agency and choice. What's my piece of the pie? It's not all them. What's my piece of the pie? And I may not know their whole story, so maybe I can ask questions, not to defend and show I'm right, but to discover a whole new way to step into freedom. Guys, God has invited us to something substantial, to something so freeing and liberating. Jesus' words, I've come to give you life and life to the full, are found as we take steps towards this. How can we do that? Three concepts. Catch it, name it, replace it. So this week, all I'm asking you to do, would you pause 5 minutes, please? When you feel stuck, when your back muscles are tight, when you see red, when your thoughts are spinning, when you can only think of one thing, I just want to tell them, whatever it is. Maybe it's driven by a false narrative. Would you catch that moment? Would you begin to ask whose voice is that? Where'd that narrative come from? And would you begin to look at the truths of Jesus Christ, open the Bible, and say, could I surrender to that? Could I replace those false narratives? Because as hard as that may be, there is a freedom on the other side that my soul deeply longs for. And if you feel stuck to go, I don't know those truths of Jesus, maybe that could be through a friend, a community, a pastor. Maybe, again, simply just opening the Bible, and this is risky. Take it with a grain of salt, but I've seen this be helpful in many lives. With AI, to be able to go to AI and just say, hey, here's my false narrative. Can you use the source, the only source of the Bible and the words of Jesus, and tell me a truth to replace this false narrative? It's been extremely helpful. Bottom line, is the narratives you tell yourself today become the life you live tomorrow. There is freedom waiting for every single one of us. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for this moment, this day that we can come together and talk about such things as this. God, I know you're here with us. I know it. I know you know our hearts. I know even though we may feel so distant or feel like you're so distant, God, you're right there next to us. May that truth begin to sink from our heads to our hearts to the depth of our soul. And Father, this week, may we actually do something with what we hear today. I trust you through the power of the Holy Spirit to lead us. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.